Welcome to the Elokus channel. This is class number 12 in the discourse Oteh Kasalma, which is the second discourse in the great Maamor B'Shashek Dimu 5672. This is class number 12, and we are holding, so that would make it the 32nd class in the overall project, and we are holding in the middle of chapter 7. And as I mentioned yesterday, today is going to start a major dive into explaining the idea that we've brought yesterday at the conclusion of the class, and that is the reason why the internal lights, the Or Pnimi, is received in the vessels, internalized in the vessels, with all its ramifications, like we discussed earlier. The vessels are have an effect on the light, and that the light is able to reveal itself in the vessel and cause the vessels to become surrendered to the light. All that we've discussed earlier, and each vessel is perfectly receptive of its particular light. All these aspects that we've discussed earlier about Or Pnimi, all of this is due to the fact that the light is vesselable from its very, very get-go, which means it's meant to be received in vessels, because initially it's not the light, it's not a pure hisgalus, revelation of the nefesh itself. It's a hisgalus, it's a revelation of a koyach in the nefesh, that's where the nefesh carries within itself, a koyches pnimim, carries within itself its ability to be able to transmit itself into vessels. Even in the etzem nefesh, as we're going to learn earlier, even in the essence of the soul, the source of the Or Pnimi is not the Or Habali Gavol, the infinite light of the soul, but rather it is rooted in a possibility of the soul to constrict itself at the very, very beginning. All of this, that Or Pnimi is Or Pnimi from the light, not just from the end of the vessels, but from the light itself. It's meant to be an Or Pnimi, and from the very beginning is what he's going to develop now in the next 38 chapters. The conclusion of this idea, the discussion about Or Pnimi, we're going to come to an understanding of it earlier with clarity, but the conclusion of the discussion of Or Pnimi, which is all going to then be differentiated from Or Makif, from encompassing light. The discussion about Or Makif is going to start in the Maamor called Nachamu Nachamu Ami, and that's in chapter 46. So the first 45 chapters of the Sefer, besides the first two, which he was talking about Keser, which is Or Makif, he started explaining the first 2 or 3 chapters about Keser, about the Kesarim, about the crowns, which are Or Makif. Then he goes into Or Pnimi, and he wants to clarify what Or Pnimi is. And from there we can understand Or Makif, which is encompassing light, infinite light. That is going to be introduced back in chapter 46. Whole bunch of Maamorim. So we are a nice couple of months away from that. So now here we go into the deep dive, into the exploration of the origins of the Or Pnimi. That's the idea, what he's going to explain over here. The origins of the Or Pnimi, of the internal light. Let's read again so that we have the full flow. Let's read again just the first few lines from chapter 7. We've explained earlier in the mashal, meaning it, the human experience is called the mashal for the godly experience. The masha koiches mislapshem be'evadim, this that the powers become enclosed in the limbs she'enim be'erazeh, where they're not in any way an energy and a vessel are very far from each other. They don't have no comparison one to the other. Why? How then can the keli take and internalize the energy? Well, is because they are essentially. It's not only meaning it's not only a superimposed element from the outside, or a circumstantial element that somehow this energy becomes taken by vessels, but rather from its essential quality is that it's an Or Pnimi, it's an internal light. And that is, these are only the powers of the soul, they're not the nefesh itself. Loy oir etzam hanefesh, not the light of the essence of the soul. And therefore, umitzamtzemim liyas bebchenas or pnimi. And for that reason, they become mitzumtzum, they contract in order to be a pnimiistic light, to be an internal light. And to understand, this is where we were holding yesterday, we left off. To understand the concept, this idea above, the idea is as follows. What would it mean that there is koiches hanefesh that are not the nefesh itself? What does that mean? That would mean that in God Himself, He carries within Himself certain koiches. So that needs a whole lot of explanation. Tehine Yedua, it is known that Atzilus, now the main idea of the main world, where we speak already of oires and kalim, lights and vessels and energies being internalized, is the world of Atzilus. As we discussed earlier, that's where God calls Himself a man. That's where God calls Himself a human. In Atzilus, we refer to Hashem as an Adam, a man. And a man is made up of a body and a soul. And the experience of the human body and the soul is that each koyach finds its vessel in the body. All right? So the same happens in Atzilus. Now, so therefore, we're going to analyze the whole world of Atzilus to understand it's like, how does Atzilus come about? It is known that Atzilus who gilu yahelam oiretzef hamatzah. He's going to present us over here with a big question. I'm going to say the question before we learn insight. And I'm just going to do very brief, just that we have a little bit, so to create a little bit of an outline. The question that he's going to present to us over here is the notion of Atzilus, of this human, divine human, if you might say, this supernal human being, which is to make up the sphirot, the attributes, God's attributes of Atzilus. So in relationship to God Himself, how do we look at that? So we know that in the order of worlds, we say there are four worlds. Atzilus, the Kabbalists refer to the first world as the world of Atzilus. Atzilus literally is translated as emanation. Okay, and then what's the next world? The next world is Bria, creation. And the following world is called Yetzirah, formation. And then the last world, Asiya, is the made world, the actioned world, or we might call it the world of completion. So now, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya is one continuation of what? There's a certain, that you have something, and then that something gets formed and gets developed, right? It's a certain process of a development. So Bria, you start off with a created entity. Like a Hasidus explains that Bria is like the first and primary substance of existence, but it's still very, very close to the energy that created it. But it's still already a creation. It's something. There's something here. Something was produced, but it's not. It's not that developed yet, which is a quality, because it's closer to the energy. The more developed something. See, we in the physical world, the more developed something is, the more something becomes something. The more finished it is, it has value. When you have raw material and something is just in the beginning of something, it doesn't have any value. But when you're dealing with creation looking at it from the ultimate perspective of truth, a created being is a created and finished creature is the most pathetic creature. It's not that pathetic because that's what God desired, and that's where we can fulfill the purpose of all of creation. But in terms of quality of being, it's the most ignorant of all the beings. It's so limited and fixed in its own reality and only knows of itself and the immediate world around it, because it's finished in its finitude, right? It's finished in its boundaries. So the more finished something is, the more limited and bounded it is. So the world of Yetzirah is not yet completed. So the substance of reality of that world, which is far more spiritual, is less fixed and less rigid and less limited. And Bria is even more elevated and closer to the godly energy that's creating it. But yet, there is already something. which means that the beings of the world of Bria have a consciousness of self. And then from there, we continue on the process of creation until we come to a state of existence where we have such a feeling of self that we hardly feel God. And so much so that in this world, as we discussed in the earlier classes, that it's possible to feel God, but it takes a lot of work to study, to learn, to investigate, to research. So our world is primarily a feeling of self, not a feeling of the divine. In the world of Bria, there is a powerful feeling of godliness, but there is already something. Somebody other than God is feeling God. Okay, that's the world of Bria. What's Atzilus? Atzilus is before creation. So if it's before creation, so what is it? Is it God? But it's a world. So it's explained that Atzilus is an emanation. That's why we call it emanation. What does that mean? God is not creating something new. He's not bringing into existence something that wasn't. He's just revealing, emanating certain potentials, certain hidden things that were potentially in his infinite light. He carried certain potential, and Hashem now emanates and projects those potentials into expression. And as those powers come into expression, they are nothing other than expressions of Him. Him expressing Himself in a definitive state. Unlike His infinite light, which in a sense contains everything, the potential for everything, but is nothing yet, because it's still infinite and undefined. In Atzilus, He emanates, like we say, 10 Sefirot, which means 10 projections of Himself. So, in accordance to that, nothing new was created, nothing came into existence. Something that was in the abstract, something that existed in a very lofty and hidden state, now emerges out for it to be revealed and manifest. So that's the idea of why that's, and therefore it's not a creation. The next stage, through the Sefirot, the energy flows of God and produces something literally that didn't exist. It produces a creation. The creation has a substance made up of nothingness, from something to nothing, a new entity. And it's separated as a consciousness of self. Atzilus is not that. Atzilus is bringing forth hidden potentials of God into expression. That's what we say about Atzilus. But on the other hand, so what's going to be the question? The question is that we also know that Atzilus and even the first Sefira, even the first attribute, the loftiest of all attributes of Atzilus, which is Sefira Sachachma, is called Yesh Maayon. It's called something from nothing, which means that it is infinitely and absolutely removed from the Or Ein Sof. The Or Ein Sof is infinitely beyond it, and it has no existence in the Or Ein Sof. And it emerges something from nothing. V'achachma, we say it, v'achachma me'ayin timatzeh. Chachma emerges from nothingness. That means you can't trace the chachma earlier and deeper into God, which basically completely contradicts what we just said, that Atzilus is just it really is there. All the powers of Atzilus, the chachma, the wisdom, the bina, the understanding, the kindness of chesed, the gavura, they're all there in God. They just weren't seen and known and differentiatable from the infinite light. And now Hashem brings them forth that they should express themselves and show themselves. And that's what we said. And now we're turning around right away and saying it's not the case, because Atzilus says Yesh Maayon. And both of them, which is an absolute contradiction. So how can we resolve that? So this is what he's going to deal with over here to give us an understanding of how this is. So I'm going to give you briefly the order of what's going to be over the next many, many, many classes. He's going to try to resolve it by differentiating. Again, this is just a very, very vague outline so that you get a sense of the direction where we're going. He's first going to try to explain up to chapter 11 that to resolve this, we're going to explain like this. Atzilus is made up of lights and vessels. So the vessels of Atzilus, they're totally new. They are yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. You can't say that in God these vessels existed. They were just hidden and lost in him and completely overwhelmed by his light that you didn't notice them. And now he brings these vessels out. You can't say that. The vessels are completely, they were not there and they're produced something from nothing. But the energy that flows, the light that flows in the vessels, that was always there in the Ein Sof. It just was not expressed. It was not differentiated. And as a result of Hashem emanating the world of Atzilus, that comes out into manifestation, and that's called Gilui HaHelam, the revealing of what always was, but just, it's not Yesh Me'ayin. It's not something from nothing. It's taking a potential that was there and revealing it. And that's how we will resolve it. Again, if you don't understand it, it's okay. I'm just laying out a broad outline, or just that you can see a little bit where this is going. This is going to be his first attempt to resolve it. But he is going to prove that that's not the case. He's going to prove that even the lights of Atzilus have to be yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. You can't say that in God's very, very essence that they exist, these lights. But on the other hand, we say they're Gilui HaHelam, it's what is concealed is revealed. So this is all going to lead up to the concept that he's been talking, that I mentioned earlier, that there is Orein Sof, and there is, which is the infinite light, and there is Orein Sof as he is Noise Koichos, as he carries powers. And the Orein Sof, as he's carrying powers, those powers that are hidden in the Orein Sof, they are the source of the lights of Atzilus, and for that, the lights of emanation. And in that sense, we say that Atzilus is Gilui HaHelam. It's the revelation of the concealment. But to the Orein Sof itself, of course, Atzilus, the lights and the vessels, are all yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. So again, it's not meant to understand what I just said, unless you learned this already or if you've gone into it already. I'm just giving you a little bit of an outline, and all of this is going to take us through over the next many, many, many chapters and many, many classes. So now that we've gotten that, let's start this exploration over here. Please don't give up if this was a little over your head, because we're going to break it down piece by piece. You do what is known that Atzilus, regarding the world of Atzilus, we say that Atzilus is not a world, it's not a creation, but rather, which creation means something from nothing, something was created. Like we say in a person that he's creative means he can come up with something totally new that no one thought of. So that's what creation means, something new. That's what the Ramban says, the Ram Nachmanides, that Bereshis, the word bara means to bring something out from non-being to beingness. But Atzilus, we say, is not that way. That would be true about the world of Bria. It's something new. But in Atzilus, we say it's Gilui HaHelam. It's only revealing a concealed, hidden thing. From the infinite one, Hamatzel, the emanator. So there is the emanator, which is God himself, and he is emanating, which means bringing out the world of Atzilus from a hidden state. Shazel inyan Atzilus, that's the meaning of the word Atzilus. Meloshin comes from the wording, from the same word as Va'atzalti min haruach. Va'atzalti min haruach means I will emanate from Moshe Rabbeinu's spirit. Asher alecha, that's on you. What's that referring to? 2-3 weeks ago was Parshas Bahaloscha, and in that Torah portion we learned how Moshe was complaining that he cannot take care of the Jewish people by himself. They're too much of a burden. And he's asking God that it's not fair to place the people all upon him. So Hashem says to Moshe, you know what? I'm going to give you assistance. Let's take this. You should gather 70 of the elders, and then I'm going to emanate upon them from your spirit. So I'm going to turn them into like offshoots of Moshe, spigots of Moshe's energy. So Moshe, you're the fountain. You're the only one who really can be the go-between me and the Jewish people, because you're plugged into me, into God. You can communicate with me. You're the prophet. They're not prophets. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to flow from your prophecy. I'm going to open up a faucet from you, from your soul, into their souls. And then the people then are not going to be all coming to you, because people are going to be able to engage God and receive prophecy from God through the 70 elders, who are really then receiving it from you. Okay? That's the concept that Hashem said to Moshe. Rashi says it's like someone has a flame and others come and take fire from the flame. Moshe is the only one who was able to capture the divine fire. And the others can come and light their flames, their candle from Moshe, and carry their divine inspiration to the people and speak to them and communicate with them and imbue the Spirit of God upon the people through their channeling, receiving it from Moshe. What does that mean? It's taking a ray. The concept of lahatzil means to take a ray of somebody or something that is and separate it. You're not making anything new. And he's going to prove over here. How do you know? Maybe it's almost like I gave you, Moshe, godly power, and I imbued you with my spirit. And in order to make it easier, we're going to create lower prophets. We're going to make something new. So, and that maybe that's what it means. We're going to do it from you, but we're going to create new entities. So he says that cannot be. Why? I can explain why. Like the emanation of the spirit of Moshe, Allah zakenim, on the elders, she'ein zemahus acher. It's not that their prophecy, their now divine inspiration that they carried in their souls, these 70 elite members of the elders that led the Jewish people. It's not that it became a new power. Something new was now. They were imbued with the Spirit, which was not part of Moshe. It's like their own spirit, a whole new divine inspiration that was not part of Moshe. Because the reason we can't say that is because a generation has really one true leader. Moshe is the go-between between God and Israel. He says, Anochi oimed ben Hashem u'beinechem. He's the funnel through which God channels his energy down to the Jewish people. And therefore, see, over there, the story was over there that the Jewish people asked for meat. Right? The Jewish people were asking for meat. They were complaining. And then Moshe says to God, where do I have meat to give them? Where do I have meat to give them? So it's a very interesting question, because one can ask, like Moshe, what happened to his faith? He knows God is an omnipotent being. God can do anything. Why was Moshe crying out and saying, where do I have meat to give them? He doesn't have to give them meat. God is going to give them meat. Just like God provided water from a rock and bread from heaven. God's packing sandwiches for everybody every day from the sky, from heaven. What's the problem with bringing them some meat? So it's explained, the Alter Rebbe explains this, that the reason Moshe says, where do I have meat, was because all the influence, all the spiritual energy, and also physical blessings that God provides to Israel, to the Jewish people, to all souls, it all must come from the super soul. Every generation has a super soul. That's a Rebbe. A Rebbe, the leader of the generation. He's the super soul. And every type of spiritual connection, every type of feeling, every type of an emotion, every type of divine inspiration, every communication from God to every single soul across the planet is all being funneled through the soul of the leader. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, was on a very, very high level. And Moshe was saying to God, bread, which is a type of nourishment, is something that I can find it within my capacity to pass on physical bread to the people, because physical bread is a reflection of a certain type of spiritual energy, and that type of service, I have it in me, and therefore I can give it to the people. So if it has to materialize as physical bread, let it be physical bread. But meat, and I'm not going to go into it right now, but meat, the physical meat, which is a derivative of spiritual meat, Moshe Rabbeinu says, that type of service of God, that type of spiritual energy connected to meat, is very inferior to me. I don't have that in me. I don't serve God in the mannerism of meat, with the spiritual energy of meat. If you're looking at me like I'm crazy, what am I saying over here? What do you mean serving God like meat or serving God like bread? So I'm just going to tell you just very briefly. Meat is red, and it represents fiery service of God because it's blood, it's fiery. It's so if you take the concept of meat into the service of God, it means serving God with a lot of passion, with a lot of fervor, and a lot of excitement. Bread, and I'm not going to go into it right now, but bread originates in chachma, in wisdom. So bread is a type of service of God in which is not passionate, not because it's lacking passion and lacking fervor, but because you're so deeply connected to what you're attaching that you don't even feel yourself in that service. You're completely nullified. You're transfixed. See, Moshe, when you watched Moshe daven, if Moshe prayed, Moshe wouldn't really sway and shuckle and throw himself around during prayer. When he stood like a stone. You'll say, well, he looked like he was indifferent and cold and he's not being moved by God. No, beyond that, the opposite. He's so taken by God that he can't feel himself, that he can't even feel that he's excited about God. To be excited, you have to be a little bit on the outside of something. When you're deeply, deeply, deeply connected and completely taken by something, you can't shout, you can't scream, you can't get excited. An example of that is when bases are loaded in the seventh inning, in the ninth inning in the seventh game of the World Series, and it's a tie game, and there's a possibility now for and the count is 3-2, and the pitch is coming in. There's not a sound in the stadium because at that moment everybody is like so enamored by what's going to happen that they don't even know they exist. The moment after the swing happens, the ball gets hit, it's a line drive into left field, it's going over, it's going out. The place goes crazy. Why? Because at this moment, at the moment it's happening, you're so lost. You have to step a little bit out of it to get excited about something. And that's the silence. So Moshe Rabbeinu's service was in a service of silence. And bread, for whatever reason, the etymology, the spiritual etymology of bread is related to this type of connection. Meat is more of an external type of a service. So Moshe says to God, I can't give them meat. I don't have that type of connection. It's too low for me and I can't provide that. And that's why Moshe's generation served God from a higher level. They served God on par with Moshe, not on a par with meat. So Moshe was saying, I know I have to give this to them, and they want it. They're demanding its fiery passion in their service of God. See, it wasn't just they were asking for meat; they were asking for a fiery type of a passion. And Moshe said, I don't have that in me. So God says to Moshe, okay, I know you're beyond it. So we're going to open up spigots. We're going to open up a faucet of people that are on a lower level than you. And they could hypothetically get excited about God. And your spirit is going to come down into them. And through them, you're going to be able to give meat. So it's you giving the meat, but it's you giving the meat through the Zekanim. And by it going through their souls, it's being downgraded and it could come down to the level of meat. But what is he trying to prove? I know this needs a little more explanation. We're going to leave it for tomorrow's class. What we see over here is the idea that when Atzilus does not mean something completely new, Atzilus means the translation of a certain potential that is hidden in someone's soul but not actualized. Let's say Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe had the potential for fiery service of God, but it was because he was on a much higher level, it was canceled in his soul. It wasn't visible in his soul. He needed to project it outward into them, which they were more connected to this type of level, and then it can become transmittable to the people, both as physical meat and as a spiritual type of service, which is associated with meat. But this is all to explain this concept of Atzilus. Okay, I know I'm going to get over time, and I don't want to do that. So we're going to come back to this point, Ezra Hashem, tomorrow. Meanwhile, we should see Mashiach today.